The main prediction that I want to make is we're going to see chaos, financial chaos, and other types of chaos. The situation is going to get totally out of control, and the economy and the markets are going to be going up and down like an elevator with a lunatic at the controls, which I think is quite a good analogy. It's accurate. So that being the case, what am I doing right now? I'll tell you what I'm doing and how I'm positioned, and have been for some time. I've been pointing out for a very long time, because it's been true for a very long time, that the banking industry itself lies on a foundation of quicksand. I don't want to get into a discussion of the details of sound classical banking, but in the past, when banks were first formed, and really up until about 100 years ago, deposits were strictly divided into two types: savings account deposits and checking account deposits. Totally different businesses, totally different types of deposits. They've been merged and melded today. And in the last 100 years, central banks all over the world have become immensely profitable for the banks by printing up money and allowing them to lend out several times the amount that's deposited with them. So I just wanted to mention these things, is that no, the banking situation hasn't been solved. All the debt in the world, at some point, it's going to collapse, either with a catastrophic deflation, a la 1929, or a runaway inflation, a la Germany in the 20s. They painted themselves into a corner. So no, the banking situation is going to reappear as a problem again and again and again, because the whole industry is based on what amounts to a fraud, which is fractional reserve and central banking. So stormy weather ahead for decades, many decades actually, but certainly starting in 1971 when gold was taken completely out of the monetary system with the Nixon devaluation. The dollar has in effect been linked with and backed by oil. It's called the petrodollar. But among the many other things that the Biden administration has destroyed is that system. When they nationalized all of the Russian assets they could get their hands on, how much was that? 300 billion, 600 billion? Depends on whether you're counting just the Russian government's assets or the assets of so-called oligarchs as well, I suppose. But at this point, the bell has rung, and people can see that if you own dollars, even outside the United States, because all dollars clear through New York, the US government can take them away from you at will, the way they did to the Russians. Now, the Chinese have been designated an adversary, and they say the Chinese are sitting on over $1 trillion worth of government securities. And they realize that that's a hot potato that the U.S. could do to them, take a $1 trillion worth of assets away from them just by stealing it. In fact, this can happen to any country. So this is the reason why, in addition to recognizing that the dollar is being printed up like a third world currency, that people are trying to get away from the dollar. Now, what's happened is that the Russians and the Chinese, and they're being joined by the Indians and the Turks and now the Brazilians, everybody's trying to get out of the dollar system because they realize that the dollar is an unstable currency backed by nothing but faith in the U.S. government. And that is diminishing rapidly. So they're coming up with an alternative currency and an alternative way of trading with each other without using dollars. This is really, really serious for Americans because since about 1980, the major export of the U.S. has not been Boeings, it's not been wheat, it's not been anything except for dollars. The U.S. government ships up dollars, and because everybody prints up dollars, since everybody accepts them, there are now trillions. We don't know how many trillions of dollars floating around outside the U.S. that actually are a liability against the U.S. government, but actually against the American people. And at some point, when faith in the dollar is lost, those dollars are all going to come cascading back into the U.S. in exchange for land and securities and other real goods. So we'll have a lot more money in the U.S. as foreigners want to dump the dollar and less real wealth owned by Americans. It's going to be a catastrophe. The Russians and the Chinese, two adversaries to the U.S., have had to trade things between each other using dollars, which is really rather perverse to use their adversaries or even their enemies' currency. But they don't trust each other's currency really either. I mean, the Chinese don't trust the ruble and the Russians don't trust the yuan so much. So I think what's going to happen is that gold is going to be reinstitutionalized as actual money because none of them trust each other's central banks and each other's fiat currencies. They're all fiat currencies. Some are better managed than others, of course. So what's happening now is that the Chinese have a major gold exchange in Shanghai, and you can trade your yuan there for gold and export the gold. So we actually are going back to a subtle gold-backed system again. But it's going to become much more obvious as a real gold-backed system in the future. And I think that's one reason why gold is going higher. I've been involved in gold personally since the early 1970s. I've bought a lot over the years. I've always used it as a savings device. Put the gold away, forget about it. That's what savings are all about. And it's been okay. We've gotten like 50-to-1 returns in 50 years. It's fine for a savings vehicle. And occasionally it's a good speculative device. Right now, relative to everything else in the world, price of cars, houses, meals, clothing, gold is reasonably priced, I'd say. But my guess is that as the world descends into chaos, and I think that's true, we are going to see chaos later this year and throughout this decade, there's going to be a panic into gold because it's the only financial asset that's not simultaneously somebody else's liability. So it's again going to become a good speculation as well as a good savings vehicle. The dollar is on its way out. It's going to, nobody uses the currencies, all have a half-life. They're just things created by central banks. Gold is, as I said before, the only financial asset that's not simultaneously somebody else's liability. There's going to be a panic into gold at this point and out of the dollar because there's so many of them. They're like hot potatoes outside the U.S. And it's also, they're hoping, a way to keep the economy propped up. You know, they've gone to negative interest rates until recently. I thought it was metaphysically impossible to have negative interest rates, and actually it is negative interest rates, which we had at the peak. There were about $17 trillion worth of bonds that had negative interest rates. I mean, it's actually a form of tax on savers. So they've tried that, and they've tried quantitative easing. Funny how that phrase has become accepted because it really means just money printing. But everybody doesn't say money printing, they say quantitative easing. They've tried that, and inflation's gotten out of control, but it's going to get much more out of control in the years to come because most of the U.S. government's deficits are not financed by taxpayers or by Chinese lenders, financed by money printing, selling government bonds to the Federal Reserve. So kind of the last arrow in their quiver, it seems to me, are central bank digital currencies. And at that point, all of your money is nothing but a digit on your cell phone or in your computer. And at that point, everything clearing through the Federal Reserve, it means that they're in a position to debit or credit your account, whether you're naughty or nice, to do anything at all they want. It was bad enough just having paper currency instead of gold as money, but paper currency itself is going to disappear. So you're going to have zero privacy. The powers that be will know absolutely everything that you buy or sell or own. This is a catastrophe in many, many ways. It's going to end very, very badly. These people have overreached. I'm not sure exactly how it's going to unfold, but they're trying to implement it in almost every country in the world. And we'll see the degree to which the average consumer, the average American, the average citizen in the world doesn't have much choice as to whether he accepts it or not. Because if you don't have gold and silver to use to buy gasoline or food, and paper currency has disappeared and ATMs are going to disappear with them, well, if you want to do anything, it has to be using your cell phone and the digital currency. So you're going to be totally manipulated. It's really serious. It's a disaster. It's a catastrophe. I hate to sound so gloomy, but the fact is that Western civilization, which is the best thing that has ever evolved, has been going downhill slowly, starting with about the time of World War I, and the descent has been accelerating. So that at this point, I'm not even so worried about the markets collapsing. I mean, they can print more money and prop them up here and there. I'm really worried about civilization and the culture itself collapsing, which I think is obviously happening all around us. The main prediction that I want to make is we're going to see chaos. Financial chaos and other types of chaos. The situation is going to get totally out of control, and the economy and the markets are going to be going up and down like an elevator with a lunatic at the controls, which I think is quite a good analogy. It's accurate. So that being the case, what am I doing right now? I'll tell you what I'm doing and how I'm positioned, and have been for some time. I've been long oil, but especially medium-sized oil companies, especially small Canadian companies, many of which are yielding 8 to 10% in current dividends. And I think those dividends are going up because I can build a case why oil, even from its current level of about $80, is going a lot higher. I'm positioned in natural gas companies, medium-sized ones, once again. Same kind of dividend yields. I like the ones, especially in Alberta, in Canada, which is, well, it's not saying much, but it's the freest province in Canada. And they have those same kind of yields. And natural gas, as we speak, is probably the cheapest commodity out there. You ought to pay attention to it because the 25-year low in natural gas was $1.50. That was reached about 25 years ago. Today, it's trading at around $2.20. In real terms, it's half the price of its previous all-time low. So natural gas, I think, is an excellent place to be right now. So that's another observation that I'll make. So oil, gas, small companies that produce them, and metals. All of the metals, quite frankly, are, I think, reasonably priced right now. Gold is, if it's reinstituted as something resembling day-to-day money, or if not that, at least money for trading between government blocks, I think it's got to go a lot higher. So I think we're in a new bull market for gold. It's going to from $2,000 to $3,000 a year dollars in the next year or so. That's my guess, my bet. But as important it is for you to own individual gold coins, I'm talking about small coins like sovereigns and quarter eagles and quarter maple leafs, that type of thing. I think as a speculator, one of the best places to be is now cyclically smaller gold stocks, which are very, very cheap. They're like all-time lows relative to the price of gold. And at some point, the public is going to pile into them. And since they're not even small caps, they're not even micro caps, they're not even nano caps, some of these stocks are pico caps, they could be quite explosive. In the past, the whole market of small gold stocks, and you can include copper and uranium, I'm a big bull on uranium as well, and a number of other metals, has gone 10 to 1, with individual stocks going to 100 to 1, and I've personally owned stocks that have gone 1,000 to 1. Not over a lifetime, I'm talking about 2 or 3 years. It's absolutely absurd how volatile these things are. But now, nobody's interested in them, nobody owns them, they're really cheap. So that's where I am. That's where I am. I own a lot of real estate, not all in the U.S. In fact, most is not in the U.S. because you got to diversify politically, because your biggest danger today is political, not financial or economic. It's political. So you want to diversify internationally.